Today, I want to talk about AI models. And the reason why is because in the last week, Google has come out with their newest model, and it is Gemini 3. And the reason why this is interesting is because I think there are a lot of implications that this has on the ecosystem of AIs in general, especially when it comes to ChatGPT. And more importantly, Nvidia, as they are essentially propping up what most people see as an AI bubble. And so the reason why it is so important is that Google essentially used their own proprietary chips for most of their model. Yes, they do use some Nvidia chips as well, but they built out their own in-house and they use those quite heavily when training out their model. And so this could have drastic implications for the rest of the market. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to review a breaking points video taking a look at, okay, what exactly has happened here, what is going on, and adding in my commentary over the top of it of, okay, what does this actually mean, and what are the results that I think we could see from this.
This new rollout is absolutely fascinating simply because we can look at the exponential growth in a lot of these LLMs between Google, Meta, OpenAI, Amazon, Dropbox, all these other companies, Salesforce. People are all competing against one another. And Google's new Gemini rollout has many of its competitors reeling. And the implications for this are actually titanic, mostly for OpenAI, but also for the entire chips industry. So let's read a little bit here from the Wall Street Journal. With the release of the third version this week, Google's Gemini LLM surpassed ChatGPT has become the most capable AI chatbot as determined by consensus industry benchmark tests. The reason why this is interesting is that Google has been able to do this by bypassing some of the other choke points that OpenAI has had, and because it is a monopolistic company. I mean, the truth is the vast majority of people who are even watching this are doing so on a Google product. They're doing it on YouTube. Google has YouTube, it has AI search, it has YouTube TV, it has all of these different things that roll up into this gigantic company which prints all of this money. They don't have to have the shortfall that OpenAI has, some $78 billion in losses. They've been able to come in, have this technological breakthrough with Gemini 3, which has, quote, outperformed competing models on more than a dozen benchmark tests, scoring a range of intelligence categories. But I think what's also very interesting is the chip story, Crystal, behind.
And before we get into the chips point, which is very important, that is something that, what he was saying about how, okay, Google has this monopoly. And in this instance, for building out AI, monopoly is great because if you think about it, they are a search engine, right? That was kind of their bread and butter originally. But yes, they own YouTube. If you think about all the properties that they own, they can go into your Gmail, right? So they have productivity tools, so they can scan that. They have the Android operating system. There are just all these things out there that Google owns. And I mean, it's undeniably a monopoly. But the thing about that is that they can go in, and the number one thing that builds the best models is essentially the amount of data that you can feed into it. And I think it is categorically undeniable that Google can basically say, okay, you go out there and you can look, you can search the web, basically train their tool on the entirety of the web because they are a search engine and they can crawl all these sites. And they have analytics, and they have AdSense, and they have all these things that exist out there, and they can essentially leverage that. And then when it comes to why do you think they have the best now, and I can say just based on my own personal use, they now also come up with far and away the best image generation. That's why they have Nano Banana 2 now, right? They came out with their new model. It blows everything completely away. I use it just flagrantly. It comes out with the best outputs by a country mile. It used to be, it was kind of a toss-up. Usually ChatGPT or Google, would come out, Gemini would come out with one of the best two, but now I don't even bother trying to go into ChatGPT because Nano Banana within Gemini, that's the image generation model that it uses, blows everything completely out of the water. And that's the exact thing is, it can dissect all of these videos that are uploaded onto YouTube. It can crawl the entirety of the internet. It can leverage all these data points. It can read emails. It can do all these things. It can train itself on everything. And then it can build itself off of that. Like the amount of data that's being fed in to basically the Gemini model consistently is going to give you the best outputs, just point blank. It's completely undeniable. And so that is what you're seeing. That's where having a monopoly is helpful when you're trying to build out an AI model that is reliant on how much information you're feeding into it and the quality of that information as well. So is it any surprise then that now, yes, they were a little bit late to the game, right? OpenAI, I think, had the first breakaway model. They had the first mover's advantage. But then, of course, when you have that amount of information that you're able to leverage, well, then you're going to catch up eventually. Versus, and just painting the other picture for OpenAI, they have to go out and, for a while, they were, they ripped off. They were basically plagiarizing data out there, right? But then they had to buy subscriptions to different companies and news aggregator and stuff, news creators and that kind of stuff, so that they could train their models on that. So that is the disadvantage, is OpenAI does not have any sort of access to the amount of data that Google has. So once again, of course, that will give Google the advantage eventually.
And all of this, the way that they're using their own the way that they're not having to rely on some of these more vendor finance type deals. And so that puts at risk kind of the pyramid scheme potentially that we had begun to see with OpenAI and many of the other deals that they had out there. This has major ramifications for the future of OpenAI, its ability to fulfill its trillion-dollar commitments if they can't maintain their technological edge.
Yeah, this is a gigantic deal for a bunch of reasons. And
I think he's actually missing the mark on this one, right? He said he was talking about chips, but like OpenAI doesn't actually create their own chips. They just purchase Nvidia chips. So he's a little bit off the mark here. What it actually means is that and just laying out what happened here, Gemini, so Google, and Llama/Meta, right? Parent companies Google and Meta, they have basically went down the road of creating their own chips. And they basically have said, okay, yes, everyone is using the Nvidia chips for their systems. That's what they're building out their platforms on. But what we're going to do is we're going to create these specialized chips that are basically built from the ground up for AI models, and that we think that we can do it better. And so the thing that is important about that is that if it is seen that that is actually the most functional way to do it and the most optimum way, other companies are going to essentially start doing the same thing. Now, whether they can, because once again, going back to the monopoly point, Google is so large that they're building out software systems already, so they're coding for different infrastructures, different servers, this kind of a thing. So they already have kind of a foot in the door. It's not exactly the same as being a chip manufacturer, but they understand some of the intricacies, and then they can bring in-house people who have that expertise to build on top of that. So that is point one that I would make. But the important thing for the rest of the market is monkey see, monkey do. These other companies, if they see that this is the most efficient and the best way to create the best systems, they're going to do the same thing. They're either going to seek out those same chips from Google and hope that Google will sell them to them, which means then that takes away from people buying Nvidia's chips. Or if they will not do that, they're going to try and build their own in-house as well. Then yes, Nvidia will still continue to be important in the interim until they get those chips up and running. But at any point in time, Nvidia's huge run has been fueled by supplying these GPUs and these chips to these AI companies. But now that we're seeing, okay, Gemini has had a breakthrough with their own proprietary chips, well, guess what? That's going to be the way to go forward, because it's an arms race and everyone has to mimic whoever the leader is in that space. So that is what you're seeing, and that is the importance of this breakthrough that Gemini has achieved. Now, that's not to say that that's where everything's going to go. If tomorrow OpenAI comes out with a model that is just as good or better, okay, well, then it doesn't really matter, right? Because they're still using Nvidia chips. But if people are not able to catch up and Gemini holds this lead for any amount of time, any significant amount of time, and we'll use quotation marks around significant because these time frames are so short, like if it's like 6 months or something like that, that they're holding an edge over everyone else, then in that instance, that's when people will try and mimic what they're doing, right? Because you can't be seen to being, a slower model, because then less people are going to want to use you and more companies are going to buy seats or data tokens from Google, right, for Gemini. And it's a very high stakes arms race at this point in time.
A tremendous threat to the other AI competitors. For the first time, Google has been seen to take the lead in terms of the AI race, as you were saying, on these sort of benchmark tests. It outperformed all of the competitors on every single test, save for one. So it's sort of widely being seen as the most advanced model at this point. The other reason, as you were saying, Sagar, that this is considered so significant is that Google has their own proprietary chips that were used to train Gemini 3, and Gemini 3 is largely being run on those proprietary chips. So that is really, a significant sort of shakeup in the industry and could potentially give them an edge as well. Not to mention, as you said, the fact, and this is something Matt Stoller has been all over, the fact that they have this gigantic monopoly already gives them a huge edge as well, both in terms of customer positioning and also in terms of the data that they have available to train these models. And the training, obviously, very important in terms of LLMs, because it's not like normal tech where you code it. It's actually, being trained, it's being grown. And so the more that you have to feed into this thing from everybody's searches and all of the content on the web, that's going to give you an advantage as well. To give you a sense of how significant the chips aspect of this is and how central Nvidia has become, let's put A2 up on the screen. I don't know if you guys followed all this drama last week about Nvidia's earnings. They did actually exceed their earnings expectations. And their founder said, I think quite accurately, the whole world would have fallen apart if Nvidia missed earnings expectations, because basically our entire economy is centered around that one now infamous chart of Nvidia and all the deals they have with all these different AI companies. So Nvidia has been like the central player. This maybe breaks apart that notion that Nvidia is absolutely everything within the economy.
And I have a video on this, so I'm not going to dive super deep into it. You can watch that other video if you want to, which I will link up above. But the thing I will call out about it specifically, just to kind of touch on it, so there's two ways that it could possibly go, right? Either one way is Google wants to keep their edge in the AI race, and so they say, we're not going to sell any of our chips. I think the only way that they would do that is if they felt like their chips gave them such a competitive advantage and they were doing something so unique with their chips that they thought no other chips would be able to rival it. So they want to keep their competitive advantage because they think they're going to far outpace what any of the other AI companies are able to do with Nvidia chips. The other route is they take a look at Nvidia's stock price and they say, oh, well, we want to inflate our stock price in that direction as well. So then they begin selling these proprietary chips. Because the thing is, again, Nvidia, exactly as being stated here and it was just mentioned, Nvidia is essentially propping up the entire economy. It's way overinflated for what the actual metrics of, okay, what are they actually doing in terms of revenue, in terms of, the business that they are executing on. Yes, the expectations were high and they met them. But the thing is yes, at any point in time, again, if it is looking like, okay, no one's able to keep up and Google wants to, that's the biggest component of it, is if they want to allow other competitors access to these chips. If they think, okay, it's not that much of a competitive advantage, it's just other things that we're doing that when put on top of these chips, or maybe the way that we build out, the base model for our AI in concert with our chips, right? There's something where it works together in a unique way where, we'd still be ahead. Even if we were selling these chips to our competitors, we don't think they could catch up to us. Then yes, absolutely, they will sell and then take away a ton of cap, essentially, or destroy basically the price of Nvidia, because they are not going to sell even a proportion of the chips that they were selling before. They still would probably sell quite a few, right? Because it is, leveraging both chips. So it's kind of interesting. It'll be interesting to see which way they go. If they think it is just their chips that are giving them an advantage, and that any of their competitors could just plug them in and see the same sorts of improvements that they saw in their model, then they probably are not going to sell their chips to anyone else. They're just going to continue to use them in-house and see the benefits that they're getting from them. So just a very interesting situation that we see ourselves in, and it'll be interesting, for lack of a better word, to see which way they go with it, because I could fully foresee either one of those options being possible. I don't know. I don't think anyone really knows unless you have a peek into what is going on behind the scenes of Gemini's newest model.
Yeah, I mean, we're still in this situation where things are incredibly concentrated. And for these other companies that are taking gigantic trillion-dollar bets on their model winning, this has got to be incredibly unsettling.
Yeah, exactly. The chips angle to this, the OpenAI angle, and also just the monopolistic one. I think this is the one I want to spend more time on, because it's not just search, it's Google Chrome, it's Gmail, it's YouTube. Google had already built, the perfect search engine, the perfect YouTube recommendation. I mean, the truth is like we owe our careers, right, to YouTube recommendation algorithm. A lot of other people do. You go on YouTube, and it's the best at being able to find something else that you want to watch. Now, YouTube TV is one of the major players in the cable replacement space. They've got all this stuff going on with culture. They own all these massive, troves of data. You have the Android operating system, which is global. So they know more about human behavior than anyone else already before.
And what I will call out, and you just have to give props to Google in this scenario. I mean, just think about how badly it was a meme when they rolled out their image generation, right? So if you don't recall, there were basically people prompting, show me an image of George Washington or the founding fathers, and it was like a black woman. And you're like, what are you talking about? Or show me, create images of Nazi soldiers. And it was like a Native American woman. And it's or a Chinese girl. Or it was just insane, the things it was doing. It was complete trash, and people were memeing on it. And they were so far behind. But now they have become the top one, right? But even at the 2.5, the one that was the most recent release before this one, it was still right on par, I think, with the other newest models. And it was, it was pretty good. It was pretty accurate, and I thought it did a pretty good job overall. And so, yes, when you're looking at it, I think they have, again, the praise I will give them in AI is that they have caught up and even surpassed right now versus where they started, which was drastically behind everyone. So yeah, giving them their flowers, so to speak, right now, for this achievement. I think it is an impressive one, and one that they should be proud of.
Or LLMs, and then you roll that all up into Sundar Pichai, who apparently made this the single priority inside of Google very recently. I was reading some background from my friend Alex Kantrowitz. He's a tech reporter on how they revamped the Gemini product, and they said this will be the preeminent one in the space. So it shows the monopolistic benefits to a Google, and it also shows you some of the dangers here with OpenAI specifically, and what that means for our overall economy. And that's probably what we want to spend the most time on here. Let's go to A3. I flagged this specifically because it goes back to our interview that we did last week, specifically about when will we know that we're going to start having issues with AI in terms of it starting to leapfrog. Google is actually having Gemini build the user interface in its latest Gemini update. So the AI is already doing some of the tasks around the AI itself. This is what I say is super interesting, I think, about how they're not only having the monopoly to benefit its current product, but now having the AI not just train the AI, but build some of the user interface of AI. So it demonstrates what they have long promised as the productivity benefits, again, for themselves, not necessarily for all of us. Now, with OpenAI,
this is essentially achieving, like you said, it's achieving the promise of what AI is supposed to do, which is, okay, it's improving upon itself. Yes, in this instance, it's just the UI improvements. But if you think about it, who was doing that before? Those were jobs that were done by humans. And so now that you're seeing, okay, now we're going to roll out, because here's the thing. If you have never worked on accessibility or UX design, these are things where you have literal teams of people who are figuring out these insights of, okay, what is the usability, where, how can we change user how they interact with our product, what is the usability of the product, how do we make things easier, how do we make things more intuitive. Like this, there are teams. I have worked at companies where there are teams of like tens of people that are working on these kind of things. So that's like 10 jobs slash, and it's probably even bigger. It was probably significantly bigger at Google. They care way more about this than any company that I have ever worked at. I can guarantee you that. But there's gigantic teams probably at Google working on this, and those people basically all get slashed. They all get laid off, and now Gemini is doing that over the top of them, basically replacing them. And so that is going to continue to happen. They're doing it on their own product already. How long until it begins coding itself? How long until, and that's exactly the point that we're getting to. Because all of the benchmarks that were already achieved was like, oh yes, the top line of the model is performing at the top line of human productivity, like the smartest people in the world. So then now you have Gemini break out from that and beat out all those models. Well, where are you now? Where do you find yourself? Smarter than that. So now, yes, now it can go about replacing humans, maybe even to code itself, and now it's going to hit. That is exactly where you're going to see that horizontal asymptote where it just takes off, or vertical asymptote, where it just takes off and you never, bye-bye. Like that's where you hit AGI and ASI. That is at least the theory, is that yes, you're going to see it take off and then it's going to be improving itself, and then that's where you hit a singularity and the model just is bye-bye. That's where now we're living in the future. Now it's like sci-fi. Those are the types of advancements you're going to see once it starts improving itself. That is the theory, at least. So yes, now that you're seeing it, A, job losses, but then B, now does it take off, and it's basically, it blows everyone else away because it's improving itself.
What Wall Street is beginning to notice, and you're going to start probably seeing this in stock price soon, is how much this kind of screws over a lot of their growth plans. So let's put the next one up here on the screen. So this was from CNBC, and what they say is that Google's new AI model puts OpenAI, the great conundrum of this market, on shakier ground. I do want to say this was written by Jim Cramer, so, I mean, take it with a grain of salt. That said, every once in a while, a broken clock is right twice a day. And what he does say is that if you look at this, in some of the promises of the market, specifically around these vendor finance deals, and OpenAI, while openly acknowledging that they're going to have some $78 billion or whatever in losses by 2028, everything is built on exponential growth and their ability to maintain the leading and bleeding edge for exponential growth, the best in consumer-facing AI. What this does, makes it, is so that it calls into question their competitive edge that they've long had by being one of the first movers with one of the best user-friendly chatbots. And it makes it so that that could be challenged, which would decrease its growth, which would, of course, not have them be able to fulfill all of the trillion-dollar deals, which would mean that the market valuations of all these companies, save for Google, would start to go down, and Nvidia in particular. Go to the next one, please. This is from The Information, a tech-focused outlet, and they got their hands on this new memo that forecasts, quote, rough vibes due to a resurgent Google. Now, I don't love using the word rough vibes in internal company memos, but what we say is that this November memo, it leaked a couple of days ago, says that the rough vibes and potential revenue growth toward 5%, which would be a collapse inside. And that was actually written before Gemini 3 actually launched on November 18th. Altman praised Google's excellent work, where he declared a shift to a wartime footing inside of the company. Now remember, they're valued at $500 billion. Their annual revenue needs to exceed some $20 billion this year. Their cash burn surpasses already $8 billion in 2025. Cumulative losses of $115 billion, potentially up to 2029. Forward sales need some 25 times now currently. Meanwhile, Google has $100 billion in cash. They have 4 billion users. They have an incredible competitive edge. And so you could see very quickly how this company, even if it maintains, some good growth and it continues to have, large user base, 20 billion and all that, it's going to be very, very hard to reach some 25 times expected growth and keep that exponential edge. And this is really what all these AI guys, people like Meta and Google, have been kind of telling everyone behind the scenes. They're like, yeah, look, OpenAI is great, but we actually make money. We make a shitload of money. And we have this monopolization, let's say in social media and or in Google search, and we can use that to prop up our trillions of dollars that are being spent here. OpenAI is kind of the cornerstone of a lot of the stock growth for some of the other, areas like data center, Nvidia, and others. And I think that's where a lot of the concern comes from a potential collapse, at the very least, from OpenAI. That wouldn't bring down the entire economy, but would pump the brakes. And pumping the brakes, as we've said, is potential enough to already see a major decline in a lot of stock indices, and potentially also even a modest decrease in the amount of data center growth would mean that GDP itself would begin to put us into recession territory.
Yep, that's right.
Once again, just to reiterate it, that's what I'm saying is it wouldn't, because OpenAI doesn't actually, they're not public, right? So the problem is that, yes, it would be all those surrounding companies that are kind of built up, and they're overvalued because it's all relying on OpenAI. And of course, this is the way that Google has run every single business. Like they did this with Gmail, right? As they're trying to, okay, let's get it into companies. What did they do? They offered it for free to schools. This is just, hey, inside, if you are not aware how this works, this is what they did. It was very, very interesting and I think smart route to the market. But what they literally did is they went out, they offered it for free to all these college institutions. So then all these colleges basically picked it up, used it as their email platform. So, and I was actually in college when they rolled this out. So what they did is, okay, all your email now is going to be on Gmail. So you get used to Gmail while you're in college. And it was rolled out while I was there. It was like the last 2 or 3 years, I think. So they roll it out, you start using it, and then they were banking on that when you go out into the workforce and you start becoming, growing in the company, becoming more influential, if you have any sort of say, and they come to you and you go, oh yeah, I used Gmail while I was in college, it's a way better experience than, Microsoft is basically, right? Outlook is trash. So, hey, why don't we make our entire company, let's switch our company over to Gmail. And that was essentially the play that they made was, okay, you offer it in colleges, and then as people grow their careers, maybe they switch their companies over to Gmail. And so the point that I'm making about that, though, is that they used that as essentially a loss leader, where they go, okay, we can offer it out for free, right? Everyone in these colleges can use it for free. They do not have to pay a single cent for any of this. And then with the bet that eventually it's going to pay off. And they can fund doing this because all of the revenues to YouTube, all of the revenues for Google, all the revenues for, advertising, all of the money that they're taking in from everywhere else, well, now they can offer out, that service for free. So same thing here, where it's not the exact same model, right? Because everyone offers some free services so that you can use their AI, tools, but they can build it out and they can sustain losses. And that's exactly what he's saying here, is that, okay, we can eat, all this money that we're having to pay for building out infrastructure, for designing and actually creating, fabricating these chips. Same thing with Meta. They have an engine behind their AI, and a part, but to fuel their AI business so that they can basically just treat it as a money pit, because all of that is profit anyway. They don't really care. They just, throw money at it, and then they will eventually, because they're not solely relying on the AI to be self-sufficient, right? Or in OpenAI's instance, like VC funding and, mutual investments and all that kind of stuff from like Oracle or from Nvidia, or all those companies in that big circle that basically are, just shoveling money around to each other, shuffling it around. So they're not having to rely on other people. They're just saying, we're just going to continue to throw money at it. So of course, eventually, and with the monopoly of all these properties that he was talking about, they can train it on so much more data that, of course, there was an inevitability that they were going to outscale them. It wasn't so much a matter of if, but when. Because again, there's just logically, they will be able to keep continuing to grow and funnel money into it, and they don't have to be responsible to any actual outcomes. And they have surpassed them now. And like I said, I thought 2.5 was actually probably a little bit better than the current model of ChatGPT. And again, that's just for what I use it for. So again, take that with a grain of salt. I'm sure if people are using it for other things, it may have been better. But in my opinion, yes, Gemini 2.5 was even better. So now with the 3 release, it blows it out of the water. And if ChatGPT doesn't catch up very quickly, then yes, it will all be on very shaky grounds. And at any point, again, it could collapse, because the problem is that all of those, all the companies that were listed in that, the circle, right? The circle, the investment circle, all of those will be affected, because ChatGPT itself is private, but anything that affects that will necessarily affect everything else around it, especially Nvidia, if these chips from Google seem to be the actual differentiating factor and Google decides to go to market with them and sell them to other AI companies.
That's right. Let's put A6 up on the screen. Actually, David Sachs was saying yesterday something to the effect, which I found very disturbing, frankly, that we have so many chips placed on the AI boom that we cannot go back. We cannot afford it to slip. And that's what this article really reveals. It says the S&P 493 reveals a very different U.S. economy. So we've seen the stock market go basically up and up and up and up and up, breaking new records, et cetera. And we've mentioned this before, but if you strip out those 7 companies, the Magnificent Seven, that are all, sky high valuations, basically based on the promise of AI. If you take that out, the stock market picture the picture of growth is very actually weak. It looks like a completely different economy. And of course, for most people out there,
it's not even weak. It's in decline. So yeah, that's where it's all consumer goods are down 5%, but these huge stock, and because they're valued so much more than everything else, these companies are up 16%. So it drags the rest of the economy with it, and because their caps are so high and their valuations are so high, that the stock market is not weighed down by the underperformance of all those other companies. these AI companies and AI adjacent companies are dragging everything up with it.
Who are living in the real economy, they're already feeling a downturn. They're already feeling the pinch. They're not participating in this speculative fever, or certainly not mostly benefiting from the speculative fever, unless you're someone who's at the higher end of the income spectrum and benefiting from the rise in the stock market. But one possibility, Sagar, that we've been talking about for a while is, the expectation is that the AI boom is going to be a sort of winner take all economy. And I mean that in the sense that whichever company is able to achieve super intelligence first and get to this pivot point where their AI is not only training the new AI, but is also doing significant decision making, where basically everything is sort of handed off and you just have humans who are overseeing the best they can, managing this development. Whoever achieves that first is going to basically get all of the gains. So you can have a situation where the promise of AI is actually fulfilled. Now, I'm sort of terrified of what that world looks like, but if you're a techno optimist, there could be a world where the promise of AI is fulfilled, but still all of these other companies that are making trillion-dollar bets on their AI future lose the race, and you still have a massive crash and bubble pop once someone does actually achieve that level of super intelligence. And
Oh, for sure. Especially if it's Google or Meta. And again, more likely Google at this point in time. Because then all the infrastructure bets that have been made, where they're building out all these data centers, it will most likely be a winner takes all. Because again, as I had laid out before, well then when you hit that vertical asymptote and it just takes off and it's training itself and it's creating its own new chips and it's doing all these things, well then of course it's going to blow away all of the competitors. Like there's not going to be any time for them to react, and even if they do achieve it 6 months later, they're so far behind the ball and so far behind the advances that whoever has achieved AGI, then they're out of the game. They're no longer competitive. And so yes, all of those other companies who have been building out these gigantic data centers, well, what's the use of them anymore? It's literally they're trash. Like they're completely worthless. There's no use for them. All the chips, all the servers, all the GPUs, everything. All of them are just completely, there's nothing else that they can be used for. And so it's all liabilities, and it's billions and billions and hundreds of billions of dollars that are completely wasted and useless. So yes, there is a very real world where it is achieved, and when it is achieved, there is still a gigantic crash because all these other companies are now completely worthless.
So to me, this development is a reminder that even with the structure of the way this AI race is playing out, that in and of itself creates massive risk in the economy, because you are probably going to have basically a monopolistic winner take all situation where, whether it's Google, and I do think Google, it makes sense that they have a lot of advantages here, whether it's Google or some other player, when they achieve this breakthrough, they're going to leapfrog far beyond everyone else and, cause a major cratering of the valuation and the bets of these other companies. Now, if you're a company like Microsoft, you've got a lot of other revenue streams. If you're a company like OpenAI, you've placed all of your chips on, trying to get to super intelligence as quickly as possible and spending as much money as it takes and becoming too big to fail. That's basically where you've placed all of your chips. Now, we should say at this point, they are the leaders in terms of, the largest user base of their LLM. ChatGPT is the most used, I think.
But that could change on a dime, like literally overnight, especially with this releasing. Because again, the parity before was they're all kind of the same. And I think ChatGPT was ahead because it was the leading product, right? It was the market leader. It had the first mover advantage. So of course, everyone is using that. But as it becomes more and more, because I think, again, the people who are the heaviest users, like I use it pretty much in every video for just leveraging, creative output to multiply what I can do. and just, okay, let's load these up as quickly as possible and get them moving. But so I would say I'm like a super user, like basically the highest end free user that you could possibly be. So like I understand, okay, what are the intricacies and what are the nuances? And so I thought, like I said, when they were all essentially at the same level, I still thought Gemini 2.5 was a little bit better, and that was the one I kind of leaned on the most. Also because, all right, and this is just my logical thinking, I'm creating content for YouTube. The things I'm using it for are, okay, give me description, help me out with the description, give me ideas and this kind of stuff. So on that, it's like, okay, well, if Google is building and they're building off of YouTube, then that's going to give me the best outputs for YouTube. So of course, that just makes sense that I would want to use Gemini, and it would be more tailored for that platform, which is what I'm publishing on, right? That's where you're watching me. And so for me, like, it always made sense to use them anyway. For everyone else, because ChatGPT was the first one, well, of course, everyone's already using them, and a lot of the time, it's kind of like the Apple iPod / MP3 player. Like, if you were around when the iPods came out, everyone would just say, what is an iPod? Like, I worked at Best Buy when that was happening, and literally people would come in and be like, what's the difference between an MP3 player and an iPod? And anyone who knows is like, that's laughable. Like, an iPod is an MP3 player. The same thing here. It's the same dynamic where it's like, okay, because they have that first mover status and they're the most popular, then okay, everyone says, oh yeah, I'm using ChatGPT. Like, they're not saying I'm using an AI model. They're not saying I'm using an LLM. There might be a little bit more understanding of like, it is AI. So I don't think it's as ubiquitous as that, MP3 player iPod example that I gave. But at the same time, yes, it's still similar in nature to that, where it's kind of interchangeable and people view that one as the leader. But as more and more people are using this other model, and people are understanding, oh, this one is actually, they're being told that the new Gemini one is actually better, and whatever, however the word gets out there, then yes, people will begin using Google more, and that cannot be understated how important that is, because the thing is, they get inferences and they understand how people are using these AI models. And then, okay, yes, now have Gemini build out the UI for Gemini. How are people using it? What is important? Okay, now you build out the UI, and you can garner more inferences about your users the more that they're using your product. And so if you lose that competitive advantage and now everyone's using Gemini, like, yes, they already have some subset of data and they understand, here's the inferences that we've already taken, but you don't see how the usage is continuing to evolve. You don't see trends of what are being asked about, just the different topics that are trending or changing or whatever. And so that is the thing that I think is the most concerning for a company like ChatGPT is, yes, they are the number one most used, but if that shifts, that becomes a huge problem for them. Because again, the core, their entire business, not even the core, their entire business is AI in large language models and, image and video generation as well. But with Google, they have more breathing room. They don't have to be the leader. Now they have become the leader in the LLM space and image generation, I would argue as well. But they didn't need to be the leader. Again, they could just throw money into the pit, and whenever they end up overtaking ChatGPT now, then that's just when it happens. And then eventually people will migrate over to Gemini and they'll start using that. And then that becomes a much more dire situation because then they have that much less data to train off of.
They have like 800,000 users, something like that. So they're ahead in that perspective. But, I think this really shows a lot of risks for their direction and their business model.
Yeah, I mean, what you can see at the very least here is with questions and uncertainty, that enough is because of where the markets and how it's all worked would be enough to bring down some sort of downturn, which again, we have to keep underscoring, is the only thing propping up the US economy in terms of the big numbers that people in Washington care about, GDP and stock market. Now, I know the vast majority of people watching this, that doesn't affect you all that much. Although I would say it does affect you in the way that interest rates work, in terms of if there is a crash, you can be sure you may not have benefited on the way up. You definitely will suffer the consequences on the way down. It can, liquidity. There's all kinds of downstream things. But I think just to hammer this home, this Washington Post has a graphic, A6 please. So the S&P 493, and what it shows is that 132% growth, excluding the Magnificent Seven, since 2019. Whereas from 2025, it's 1,057%, which includes the Magnificent Seven. This just, people don't appreciate just how powerful these companies have been to the illusion, let's say, of growth. And if the 493 of the 500 companies are not actually doing all that well, although, it's not, I'm not saying that they haven't done as well, but they're not, compounding at a level which is so exponential, that alone just demonstrates some of the pushback, the draw that could happen with some of those valuations.
And that's exactly what I was calling out, where I was saying, yes, it's on a rampant tearaway, and if at any point in time that all starts to collapse, then everything goes down. Which, once again, given this Google information, it'll be interesting to see what people do in the next week or two. Again, if ChatGPT is able to respond and come out with a new model of their own that maybe they have been slow rolling and kind of sitting on for a little bit, or if they have no response. And if they have no response, again, I think it's a tinderbox, and a lot of it could, especially because it was achieved on the backs of their own proprietary chips, majority, not entirely, there could be a reckoning, right? And when you're seeing SoftBank and Peter Thiel and these types of people pulling out billions of dollars from Nvidia, did they know something? They might have. So, and this was basically all reported on a shortened week, and so I don't think that it has had time to fully hit the markets, right, because of the holidays and that kind of stuff. But when it does, it'll be interesting to see exactly what the fallout of this is, because I predict that there will be some sort of fallout of this. Anyway, I just wanted to cover this because I thought it was a very interesting topic and conversation. It kind of dovetails with, okay, what is the AI bubble around it? How is it possibly threatened by this new release of the Gemini model? And what are some of the possible scenarios that are going to come from this? But if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more content like this from me, drop me a subscription below. It really does help my channel grow. And if you have made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.